Okay, so as requested, I'm making a video about the lab 1, solving quadratics. So this is more for students who have completed algebra 1. Not that other students can't understand, it just might be a little bit, the math behind it might be a little more confusing. So whenever you have a quadratic function or a quadratic to solve it, there's this equation right here called the quadratic equation. And every quadratic you solve will have two solutions. And in the equation, the first number we call a, the coefficient on the x squared term is what they call a, the coefficient on the x, the term with just an x is called b. So if there's no term with an x, it's just 0. And then the constant, or the one that doesn't have an x on it, is called c. Anyway, so if you haven't taken algebra 1 yet, completed it, this might be a little confusing, and you're welcome to skip this lab and move on to your Mad Lib lab. Anyway, this program, so let's go through the directions on this. It's gonna prompt the user for 3 inputs, A, B, and C. And then it's going to do the quadratic formula in the program, and it'll print the answers. Okay, so it's really not too crazy. So what we're going to do, also, I mean, if you haven't taken algebra 1, you're welcome to try this, okay? So what we're going to do is we want it to, now you can make this a function if you wanted, make this all inside a function. I'm not going to. I'm just going to say A equals, I'm going to change this to a float, because remember, anytime the computer reads in anything that's user input, it changes it to a string or words. So I use this float right here. So it's a number, and I know in the instructions it said change it to an integer, but I'm just going to change it to a float, because remember, floats are decimal numbers. So that means the user can use this program to solve any quadratic. Okay, so we're going to have our inputs going to say, please enter A. Put a space there. Okay, I'm going to copy this and just use the same thing for B and C. Okay, so we're going to change these a little bit. Please enter, this is going to be our B. Please enter B. Please enter C. Okay, so now we have all those inputs. Now we just have to write down the quadratic formula, which can kind of seem a little bit confusing in this situation, because the quadratic formula has a plus or a minus, and there's actually no way to do that in Python, so you have to do it separately, okay? So, shouldn't have done that quite yet. Okay, so we have a negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So what we're going to do is there's going to be two solutions. I'm going to call them x1 and x2. x1, we're going to take, says we take the negative b plus or minus, but this one I'm just going to make it b plus the square root. So we're going to use a square root function, square root of b squared. We square things like this in Python. B squared minus 4ac, so 4 times a times c. All right, and then all of this is supposed to be over 2a, all of this. So we've got to put this in parentheses so that I know that I'm supposed to do that. So put it over 2 times a. Okay, so now let's just make sure this is going to work. Print x1. Please enter A. I'm going to put in 1. Please enter B, 3, C, 2. Okay, all right. Now you notice there's an error, and that's good. There should be an error here at this point, unless you've imported something. That's because the computer doesn't know what this is. It doesn't know what square root is. Okay. So what you're going to do is you're going to import a module. So we're going to import math. Okay, and we're actually going to change this a little bit later to C math, but for right now, we're going to import math. Another thing you can do is you can say from math, import square root. So either way, you want to do that. From math, import square root. So if you do that, notice how this lighted up in yellow? That's because now the computer is like, oh, that's a function, right? The problem with this is you can only use the square root when you're doing this. And in a little bit, we'll see that we need to use a little bit more. Okay, so I'm just going to say import math, because that means I can use any of the functions in math. All I have to just type is just math dot square root. Okay, see how it highlighted? That's going to work now. Let's try this. So please enter A, 1, 3. I'm putting in 1, 3, and 2 because I know the solutions should be 1 and negative, or 2 and -1. Okay, great. Sorry, -2 and -1 is what the solution should be. Okay, so it looks like it's working so far. So let's use this to make our second x value. So for this time, remember it's plus or minus the square root. The first time we did plus the square root of that. Second time we're going to do minus the square root. Okay. So please enter A, B, and C. All right, and it ran the code, but I didn't have it print, so we're going to have it print so we can make sure it's doing what it's supposed to. X1 and, oh, I got to change that to X2, don't I? X1 and X2. X2 here. We're going to print those and see how it's doing. Okay, so we're going to do 1, 2. Okay, perfect. Looks like it's working. -1 and -2. Okay. But this can get a little weird at different points. So let's just try a whole bunch of different values. Let's try, I don't know. Look, it didn't work. It says that there's a domain error, math domain error. So that's going to happen because the values I entered for A, B, and C, oops, we'll clear up. The values I entered for A, B, and C made it so there's actually a negative number inside the square root, okay? And you can't take the square root of negative numbers, or can you, right? That's when we start learning about imaginary numbers. So there's 2 things you can do. The first thing you can do is, there's actually 3 things you could do. You can make it so that if you get a negative inside that square root, your computer program is going to reject it and have them answer or enter a new question. Okay, we don't really want to do that. What you can do is you can enter a math.absolute value and take the absolute value of everything inside your square root. So that'll make everything positive in your square root so you won't have that domain error. The problem with that is that sometimes if you make everything positive in your square root, that's going to change your final answer and you're not going to get the correct answer on everything, okay? So actually, what I want to do is I want to import CMath, okay? So CMath is complex math. And it can take the square, in CMath or complex math, you can take the square root of imaginary numbers. Okay, so what I need to do here is change this to CMath and change this to CMath, okay? All right, so let's try this again, that same thing, see how it works. So we're gonna enter A, and let's see, where are the weird numbers I entered before? Okay, 56, 3, 12, that's what didn't work before. And look, it's going to work. This time though, it gave us complex answers, okay? So let's go back and try that with our original A, B, and C that I tried. So we're gonna try it with 1, 3, and 2. And look, it still gives you the same answer. You still get a -1 and a 2. They just say plus 0j, plus 0j. So that is they use j instead of I on here. So that means if you have 0j, that means you have no imaginary number, okay? All right, so this program here, because we used complex math, this is going to be able to take the square root of any number. Okay, so I'm just going to change this a little teeny bit here. I'm just going to change the script. So I'm going to say your solutions are, and then we're going to use curly braces. And curly braces. Remember when we use curly braces to insert variables in the middle of a string, we have to put an F out front, okay? So it's an F string. All right, we're gonna put in A, 1, B, and C. That says your solutions are -1 and -2. All right, that's it for this one. That will solve a quadratic function. So hopefully that was helpful.